The next person that really took on Lincoln was Lerone Bennett in a book entitled Forced into Glory, Lincoln's Dream, Lincoln's White Dream. Lerone Bennett was an editor of Ebony magazine. He writes, "The basic idea is simple. Everything you think about Lincoln and race is wrong. Every schoolchild, for example, knows the story of the great emancipator who freed Negroes with a stroke of a pen out of the goodness of his heart. The real Lincoln was a conservative politician who said repeatedly that he believed in white supremacy. Not only that, he opposed the basic principle of the Emancipation Proclamation until his death, and was literally forced into glory of having issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which Lincoln drafted in such a way that it did not in itself free a single slave." The third person and there are others, I don't mean to but I'm trying to give you some illustration that not everyone, not all the scholars, all the writers are in love with Abraham Lincoln. Michael Lind, What Lincoln Believed, The Values and Convictions of America's Greatest President. Those of you who heard me in my earlier presentation, I confess that it is difficult for me to read somebody that really bashes Lincoln, which tells you on one hand that I'm biased Lincoln, but I'm proud of being biased Lincoln. I'm convinced that he was a really good guy and that he was our greatest president. And I made the reference to the fact that I like to read before I go to bed, which I assume some of you do. I find that getting me ready to go to sleep. I'm lost no matter what my troubles are or what's heavy on my mind. I get lost in the story and so forth. Well, I just finished reading Michael Lind, and I must tell you that I stopped reading him before I went to bed because I couldn't go to sleep. I was so cranked up. I was ready to write him a letter because it's the most acidic book about Lincoln that I've read. Here's why I got Bill Anderson at least stirred up. He writes, "For Lincoln, as for most free soilers, the purpose of preventing the extension of slavery to the territories was to keep the West white. In other words, it was not what Lincoln maintained, and I believe that he wanted to put slavery on the route of ultimate extinction. And one way is to stop the spread of it. And why didn't he just abolish slavery? Because he didn't think he had any legal authority to and he didn't. And you can imagine what would have happened if he would have tried it. He probably would have been impeached. But this guy says, the real reason was he wanted to make sure that the new states in the West were all white. Now, I need to take this issue on because there's nothing that Lincoln gets challenged on more than the issue of emancipation and race. Yes, you have to first say that Lincoln believed in colonization. Lincoln doubted whether or not a white racist majority, men we're talking about, would ever accept free blacks generally. He doubted the ability of those people, all of the people, to amalgamate whites, so amalgamate free blacks. So he was in favor of colonization. Maybe they would have a better life. Yes, in terms of the way we use the term racist today, we conclude that Lincoln was a racist. You also have to conclude that Lincoln distinguished between what you and I would say natural rights and civil rights. Lincoln's basic premise was the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. That's a natural right, and he stood on that ground. But was Lincoln a leader of civil rights, that he thought that freed blacks were his equal in every respect, other than being human? Did he believe they ought to have the vote and so forth? Well, did he believe that women ought to have the vote? No. Did the white majority think that women ought to have the vote? No, they didn't. What concerns me most with Lynn and some of these others is that they've really taken Lincoln out of context. I believe when you look at people's attitude, you put them along a continuum. So let's take the issue of slavery. If we were putting the issue of slavery and equal rights on a continuum in 1861, we would have the abolitionists on the left and we would have the white supremacists on the right. And I believe Lincoln would probably be somewhere in the middle. And that's the way it is for many of us on other things that we have strong feelings about. If somebody says, Bill Anderson, you're a conservative, my conservatism is somewhere along the continuum, right? Because if we were doing that today in politics, we would have the most conservative being the religious right, I think. And then we would have people who are extremely liberal way over on the left, right? And when candidates run for the president, they first try to distinguish themselves from the other candidates. But as the election gets closer, they come closer to the middle because that's where the majority of people's opinion is, and they become more centrist. Well, are we born a conservative and a liberal? Are we born a racist? Are we born a member of the religious right? I don't think so. But we start out somewhere, probably influenced by our surroundings and our parents and so forth, and through our life experiences, I believe most of us move some. We may move to one extreme, but I think most of us probably move closer to the center through our life experiences. So my take is that Lincoln, first and foremost, even though I've said, yes, he was a racist, he was not an advocate of equal rights, he did not believe that freed blacks were his equal, other than being a human being. He thought they were his equal, that they deserved to enjoy the fruits of their labor and all of that. I believe Lincoln was looking for a solution to the emancipation of slaves that the white racist majority would buy. And the people who were his opponents, William Seward and Solomon Chase, were more abolitionists than Lincoln, but they couldn't get elected in 1861 because their position was too extreme on the question of slavery. And I believe without a civil war, no abolitionist could have been elected president for the next 100 years because the white majority would never support them in that. The last book in this regard is one written by Tom DiLorenzo. And I've only read parts of it, but I've read the reviews. And wow, does he take a whipping. And his book is called Lincoln Unmasked, What You're Not Supposed to Know About Dishonest Abe. And let me read just a little section. He's talking about his professor who spoke about Lincoln, and he was categorized as being anti-Lincoln. And his name was Bradford. That's why that name will come up. Things have not changed much in the academic world since the Bradford affair. I have been subject to name-calling, as has anyone else who attempts to deviate from the official truth. Okay, all of those scholars that I mentioned, he suggests that they're all part of a Lincoln cult. Okay? Lincoln has been portrayed as a saint, and his defenders are so sanctimonious that they consider themselves to be self-appointed gatekeepers of the truth. They do whatever is necessary to keep unflattering information about Lincoln from the public. If they do dare to mention such facts, they spin their statements to mislead, misinform, and confuse the reader. One has to wonder, what purpose does all this deception and misinformation serve? If Lincoln was such a saint, why can't his record speak for himself? Well, the conclusion is that for a long time there were way too many apologists for Lincoln. They were sugarcoating Lincoln, but that day is long past. You read any good biography and they will point out Lincoln's warts and his deficiencies. He was not a perfect human being, and there were areas where he was vulnerable. And so DiLorenzo has been reading the wrong stuff and drinking the wrong tea. I hope that this presentation is a little bit helpful as you think about this vast literature of Lincoln. And if you are trying to make a decision what to read, I hope maybe one of those bibliographies, you'll tuck it away and say, well, maybe that's what I ought to read, and probably not spend much time with Thomas DiLorenzo. Thank you.